Hey everyone, and welcome to this deep dive. We are going to be taking a look at excerpts from Dr. Martin Seligman's book, What You Can Change and What You Can't.
Oh, a fascinating book.
It is.
Yeah.
And we're going to be focusing on three biggies: depression, anger, and dieting.
Some pretty heavy stuff, but super relevant to all of us.
For sure. Now, fair warning, these are sensitive topics, but we're sticking to the facts here, folks. Just trying to break down the science and offer some neutral analysis. Figure out what we can actually change and what we're kind of stuck with.
Exactly. Like, where's that line between nature and nurture? What can we control and what's just part of who we are?
Right. What are we up against here? So, our mission today, if you choose to accept it, is to dive deep into the complex world of human behavior and emotion.
Seligman definitely doesn't hold back. He throws out some statistics about depression right off the bat that really made me stop and think.
Oh, okay. Give me one. What's one of those statistics? Okay, so get this. People born in the latter half of the 20th century are 10 times more likely to experience depression than those born in the first half.
10 times! Wow, that is a huge difference. It's crazy. It makes you wonder, like, did our grandparents just have it easier mentally, or are we just, like, better at diagnosing it now?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? I mean, think about all the changes that have happened in the last century. Seligman points to some big societal shifts.
Like what?
Well, for one, the rise of the thin ideal, all that pressure to look a certain way.
Oh, yeah, that constant bombardment of images and messages telling us we're not good enough.
Right. It can really mess with your self-esteem.
Absolutely.
But it's not just body image. There's also a lot more pressure to achieve these days. To be on all the time, constantly connected.
Yeah, like we're all supposed to be hustling 24/7, have these perfect Instagram feeds, never show any weakness. It's exhausting.
It really is. And it can be incredibly isolating.
For sure. Okay, so we've got this societal pressure cooker simmering in the background. But let's stick with depression for a minute.
Sounds good.
Seligman talks about different types of depression, right? Like unipolar and bipolar.
Exactly. And
Yeah.
that distinction is so important because they need to be treated differently.
Okay, so break it down for me. What's the difference between unipolar and bipolar depression?
Well, unipolar is what most people think of as classic depression. Persistent sadness, fatigue, loss of interest in things you used to enjoy.
Right, like the classic symptoms.
Exactly. But bipolar depression, sometimes called manic depression, swings between those lows and intense highs, like periods of really high energy, impulsivity, and even risky behavior.
So it's not just about being happy or sad, it's about these like extreme shifts in mood.
Exactly. And that's why the right diagnosis is so crucial.
I can imagine.
Bipolar depression often needs medication, like lithium, to manage those swings, while therapy alone might not be enough.
Interesting. So medication is key for bipolar. What about unipolar? I know Seligman calls it normal depression at times. Is there actually such a thing as normal depression?
It's more common than you might think. Seligman found that about a quarter of people are experiencing a milder form of depression at any given time.
So he's saying like a little bit of depression is just part of the human experience. We're all on this spectrum, and some of us just happen to be like dipping our toes into the shallower end of the pool.
Pretty much. And it's important to understand that spectrum. Depression isn't always this black and white, all or nothing thing. It ranges from those blah days we all have to something debilitating and life-altering.
That makes sense. It's like with physical health. Sometimes you have a sniffle and sometimes you have the flu. Both are illnesses, but the severity is vastly different. Okay, so when it comes to the more classic unipolar depression that many of us might experience, what are our options? What does Seligman say about how to treat it?
Well, he outlines four main approaches.
Okay, hit me.
We've got biological drugs, electroconvulsive shock therapy, ECS, cognitive therapy, CT, and interpersonal therapy, IPT.
Okay, let's break those down. Starting with medication. How do those biological drugs actually work, and what are the downsides?
The most common ones are tricyclics, MAOIs, and SSRIs. And for some people, they're lifesavers. They can bring relief to about 65% of people who take them.
That's a pretty good success rate.
It is, but there are some catches.
Such as?
Well, first, they can take a while to kick in, like sometimes up to 3 weeks. Imagine feeling terrible and having to wait that long to see if they even work.
Oh, yeah, that would be rough, especially when you're really struggling. And what about side effects? Are those a common thing with these medications?
They can be. About a quarter of people can't tolerate them. Either the side effects are too intense, or they just don't want to be on medication long term.
So it's not a magic bullet.
Definitely not. And even if you find a medication that works for you, there's still the risk of relapse once you start taking it.
So it's something you might need to manage over time.
Okay, now what about ECS? I gotta admit, the idea of electroconvulsive therapy always sounds a little, intense.
It does have a bit of a scary reputation, I'll admit,
Yeah.
but it can actually be highly effective, especially for severe depression that hasn't responded to other treatments.
So how does it actually work?
Basically, it involves inducing a brief seizure.
A seizure.
Yeah. And while that might sound alarming, it's a safe procedure when done correctly.
How does the effectiveness compare to medication?
It's actually more effective. It relieves depression in about 75% of cases. And it works a lot faster than meds, often within days.
So why don't we hear about it more often if it's so effective?
Well, there are a few reasons. Some people are hesitant because of the perceived severity and potential side effects, like memory loss or confusion.
Oh, right. Yeah.
Unlike with medication, it's not a guaranteed cure. Those depressive episodes can still come back. Right. It's not a one-and-done solution. Okay, let's shift gears and talk about the therapies that focus more on the mind rather than the body. What's the deal with cognitive therapy? What is that all about?
Cognitive therapy, or CT, is all about changing the way you think about things.
Oh, okay.
It targets those negative thought patterns that can really drag you down and make depression worse.
So is it like positive thinking on steroids? Just telling yourself to look on the bright side?
It's a bit more nuanced than that. It's about becoming aware of your automatic negative thoughts, those like knee-jerk reactions to situations, and then learning to challenge them.
So like catching yourself in those negative thought spirals and finding a more, I don't know, balanced perspective.
Exactly. And Seligman gives this great example. This mom feels awful after yelling at her kids.
I'm in there.
Right. A CT therapist would help her identify those thoughts like, I'm a terrible mother, and then guide her to find evidence that contradicts those thoughts.
Okay, I see. So it's not just about suppressing negative thoughts. It's about actually examining them and looking for, like, alternative explanations.
Right. It's about learning to reframe those thoughts,
Mhm.
find more realistic explanations, and focus on solutions instead of dwelling on problems.
I like that. So it's really about empowering you to kind of manage your own mind, which sounds pretty useful for preventing those future episodes.
It really is.
How does it stack up against medication in terms of effectiveness?
It's actually about as effective as medication, with around 70% of people finding relief. And here's the kicker. It's more likely to prevent those future episodes.
Oh, why is that?
Well, because you're equipped with those mental tools, right? You're not just treating the symptoms, you're learning to manage the underlying thought patterns that are contributing to your depression.
So it's like teaching you to fish instead of just giving you a fish.
Exactly.
Okay, now that leaves us with interpersonal therapy, or IPT. What is the focus there?
IPT is all about improving your relationships and social skills. It looks at those interpersonal issues that might be fueling your depression.
So things like
Things like grief, conflict, big life transitions, or even just feeling isolated.
I find it fascinating that Seligman says it was initially designed as like a placebo treatment for a study.
Oh, yeah.
What happened?
It ended up being just as effective as the actual medication they were testing.
Wow, that's wild. It really highlights how much our social connections matter for our mental well-being. So, what does IPT actually look like? Like, what do you do in those therapy sessions?
It usually involves weekly sessions, and the focus is really on identifying and tackling specific relationship problems.
Okay.
For example, let's say you're dealing with grief after a loss. The therapist will help you process those emotions and develop healthy coping mechanisms.
Got it.
Or if you're constantly fighting with your partner, they'll help you improve your communication skills.
So it's a very practical problem-solving approach. It's not just about talking about your feelings. It's about actually equipping you with the skills to like navigate those tricky interpersonal situations.
Exactly. And it's a reminder that our mental health isn't just about what's going on inside our heads. It's also about those connections we have with others.
Absolutely. Now, before we move on from depression, there's one more thing about mild depression I found fascinating. Seligman argues that even if it's not severe, it's still worth addressing. Why is that?
He believes that even mild depression, especially if it's a chronic pattern, is a sign of those like ingrained pessimistic thinking habits.
Oh, okay.
That tendency to see setbacks as permanent, pervasive, and personal. And that can really reinforce feelings of hopelessness.
So even if you're not clinically depressed, those negative thoughts can still hold you back and make life feel a little bit bleaker.
Absolutely. They can affect your relationships, your work, your overall enjoyment of life. But the good news is, Seligman believes those pessimistic patterns can be changed. For good.
And that's where cognitive therapy comes in.
You got it. By learning to dispute those negative thoughts, finding alternative explanations, and choosing a more optimistic outlook, you can break free from that cycle of mild depression. It's about rewiring your brain for more resilience.
So even if you're not feeling completely hopeless, there's still room for growth. There's still things you can do to manage those down days and create a more positive outlook. This has been a really interesting deep dive into depression. And I bet you're wondering what Seligman has to say about anger. Are you ready to explore that fiery emotion?
I think so. But first, maybe we should all take a deep breath, just to prepare.
Good idea. We might need it.
We might. All right, anger. Where do you even begin?
Well, I know Seligman has this thing called the anger inventory in the book.
Oh, yeah, he wants us to take a good hard look in the mirror.
Like a self-assessment.
Exactly.
Yeah.
He asks us to think about how often we get angry, what sets us off, and how we typically react, like taking stock of our anger patterns.
Yeah, interesting. So before we even get into managing anger, we're starting with awareness.
Exactly, because sometimes we're so caught up in the heat of the moment, we don't even realize how anger is affecting us.
Makes sense. But I'm curious about what Seligman says about the nature of anger itself. How does he break it down?
Well, he sees anger as having three main components.
Okay, what are they?
Thoughts, bodily reactions, and then that attack response.
So it starts with a thought.
Right. You feel like
Yep.
someone's wronged you, like they've
Yeah.
crossed a line.
And
Then your body kicks into that fight or flight mode, heart racing, muscles tense, ready for action.
like our inner caveman taking over.
Pretty much. And finally, there's that urge to attack, whether it's, verbally lashing out or even getting physical.
Right, right. Okay, so that's the anger recipe. But there's this whole idea out there that venting your anger is healthy. Like, better out than in, right?
Oh, yeah, we've all heard that. But Seligman actually pushes back on that idea.
Oh, really? Why is that?
Well, he argues that expressing anger can actually be harmful.
Huh. Interesting. What about that whole thing about suppressed anger leading to cancer?
Oh, he debunks that too.
Oh.
Says there's no scientific evidence to support it.
Okay, good to know. I won't be holding my breath to avoid tumors then. But how can expressing anger be bad for you? I mean, isn't it better to just be honest about your feelings?
Well, think about it. When you're angry, you're not exactly thinking straight. Your judgment is clouded, you might say, or do things you regret.
True, true.
And Seligman even suggests that expressing anger might increase your risk of heart disease. Talk about a heated argument.
So it's not just about hurting other people's feelings. It could actually be hurting your health, too.
Exactly. And even though anger is often seen as this raw, honest emotion, it can really distort the truth. It can make it harder to find a fair resolution.
So it gets in the way of clear thinking and communication.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And speaking of communication, Seligman really goes deep on the impact of anger on relationships, especially within families.
Oh, yeah. His research on how parental conflict affects kids is pretty powerful.
Oh, it's huge. His studies found that even if parents don't divorce, constant fighting creates a toxic environment.
Right.
And that can have lasting consequences for children.
Like what?
They're more likely to struggle with depression, anxiety, even have trouble forming healthy relationships later on in life.
Wow. It's a reminder that our anger doesn't just affect us, it has a ripple effect.
It really does. And that's why Seligman stresses the importance of managing anger within families.
What are his suggestions?
Well, he suggests couples consider counseling if they're constantly clashing. And he encourages parents to be mindful of how they express anger, especially in front of their kids.
So even if you think you're just blowing off steam, your kids are picking up on that negativity.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And remember, expressing anger doesn't always lead to that, cathartic release.
Right. It's not always that simple.
No. In fact, Seligman argues that it often escalates conflict and damages relationships rather than resolving anything.
Oh, interesting. So that whole get it off your chest approach might actually backfire.
He gives this example of telling someone off. It might feel good in the moment, but it usually just fuels their anger and makes them more defensive. It's like throwing gasoline on a fire.
Okay, so venting isn't the answer. What does Seligman recommend for actually managing anger? How do we, tame that inner beast?
He's a big fan of keeping an anger diary.
What's that? Like, dear diary, today I was really mad because...
It's more about noticing patterns, those triggers that set you off.
Okay.
You write down the time, the place, what happened, your thoughts, those physical sensations, what you did, and how it all played out. It's like detective work for your emotions.
So by tracking your anger, you can start to see those red flags.
Exactly. Maybe even anticipate those outbursts before they happen.
And then maybe head them off at the pass.
And once you understand those patterns, you can start to challenge those thoughts and assumptions that are fueling your anger.
Oh, so like maybe you realize you're overreacting or you're misinterpreting a situation.
Exactly. It's about taking a step back and saying, okay, is this really worth getting worked up over? Or am I just letting my emotions run the show?
Right, right. Gaining some perspective. So it's about becoming more mindful of your anger, recognizing those triggers, and then choosing a more constructive response.
Exactly.
This has been a super insightful deep dive into anger. I think we could all use a little more chill in our lives.
I agree.
But let's be honest, there's another topic that often brings up a lot of frustration and even anger, and that is dieting. Are you ready to tackle that one?
Oh, bring it on. I think a lot of people can relate to Seligman's personal struggles with dieting, which, by the way, he describes with a good dose of humor.
Oh, good. I like that he can laugh at himself.
Makes the whole discussion feel less preachy and more relatable,
Totally. It's like, hey, he gets it. He's been there too. But then he throws in all this scientific research.
Oh, yeah, he does.
That kind of challenges a lot of conventional wisdom about dieting. Like, for example, the whole idea of ideal weight versus natural weight. What's that all about?
Well, he basically calls out those insurance company weight charts.
Oh, those things.
He argues that they're based on flawed assumptions
Okay.
and might not be the best indicators of health or longevity.
Right.
He even suggests that dieting might be counterproductive.
Wait, so all that calorie counting deprivation might actually make it harder to lose weight in the long run. How does that even make sense?
It's like this, your body is a survival machine.
Okay.
It evolved to protect you from starvation.
Right.
So when you restrict calories too drastically, your body's like, whoa, hold on, what's going on here?
Yeah.
Kicks into defense mode.
Like famine mode.
Exactly. It slows down your metabolism, ramps up your hunger hormones, and basically does everything it can to hold on to those precious fat stores.
So our bodies are kind of fighting against our conscious efforts to slim down.
Pretty much, it's like, hey, I know you're trying to fit into those skinny jeans, but I'm trying to keep you alive here.
Yeah, it does make sense from like an evolutionary perspective.
It does.
But what about all those stereotypes about overweight people? Like they overeat, they lack willpower, they're lazy. Does Seligman address any of that?
Oh, he totally debunks those myths. He cites research showing that overweight individuals don't necessarily eat more than lean people. And their lower activity levels might actually be a result of their weight, not the cause.
Okay, so it's not about personal failings.
Right. It's about these biological realities and the challenges of navigating a world that often stigmatizes larger bodies.
And I think that's something that's really important to remember in this whole conversation about weight.
Absolutely.
Because it's so easy to fall into those, blaming people for something that might be largely out of their control.
Right. And, he also reminds us that genetics play a huge role in weight regulation.
Oh, for sure.
Look at identical twins raised apart. They tend to have very similar weights throughout their lives.
That's true.
So it's a powerful reminder that we can't just blame people for their genes.
It's like blaming someone for their eye color. It's just part of their blueprint.
Exactly.
But what about all those diets out there that promise, quick and easy weight loss? Surely some of them must work.
Well, Seligman analyzes what he calls the Oprah effect,
Okay.
using Oprah Winfrey's well-documented struggles with weight as a prime example. Remember when she lost a ton of weight on OptiFast back in the day?
Oh, yeah, that was a huge deal.
But guess what? She gained it all back. And that's the story for most dieters. Seligman cites studies showing that even with those super restrictive diets, the vast majority of people regain the weight within a few years.
So it's not just about finding the right diet. It's about the fact that our bodies are wired to resist those drastic weight changes.
Exactly. And he also points out the potential health risks of yo-yo dieting.
Oh, yeah.
Those repeated cycles of weight loss and regain can mess with your metabolism, increase your risk of heart disease, and even lead to disordered eating patterns.
That's a good point. So instead of focusing on shrinking our bodies, maybe we should be focusing on accepting them as they are and finding ways to be healthy at any size.
Now, that's a great point. And it segues perfectly into Seligman's discussion of bulimia nervosa.
Okay.
He actually argues that dieting is a major contributing factor to this eating disorder.
I've heard that connection before, but I've never really fully understood it. How does dieting lead to something as serious as bulimia?
Well, think about that cycle of restriction and deprivation. You're constantly fighting your body's natural hunger signals, which can backfire big time.
Okay.
Those intense cravings and urges to eat become overwhelming, leading to episodes of binge eating.
So it's like the more you try to control your food intake, the more out of control it becomes.
Exactly. And then there's the shame and guilt that often follow those binge episodes, which can lead to purging behaviors like vomiting or using laxatives.
Yeah, it sounds like a terrible cycle to get trapped in both physically and emotionally.
It is, and it all goes back to that idea that our bodies are fiercely protective of their natural weight range.
Right. Like they have a set point that they want to stay at.
Pretty much.
It's like we're fighting a losing battle against our own biology.
We might be.
Speaking of battles, Seligman shares this really interesting anecdote about his personal experiment with artificial sweeteners. What was that all about?
Oh, yeah. He talks about how he's been drinking his coffee with artificial sweeteners for years, thinking it would help him lose weight.
Mm-hmm.
But he remained overweight, which made him wonder if his body might be compensating for those missing calories in other ways.
Interesting. So it's like his body was saying, okay, you're cutting out sugar in your coffee, so I'm going to make you crave that chocolate cake even more.
It's a fascinating example of how our bodies are constantly working to maintain balance. We might think we're outsmarting them, but they often have other plans.
Right. We think we found like a loophole, but our bodies are like, nope, not so fast.
Right. It makes you wonder if all those diet foods and drinks are really doing us any favors in the long run.
Yeah, maybe those artificial sweeteners are messing with our hormones and appetites in ways we don't even realize.
Could be. This whole discussion on dieting has been really eye-opening. It's like a whole new way of thinking about food in our bodies.
It is. I agree. And this whole deep dive, we've explored depression, we've talked about anger, we've tackled dieting. It's like we've taken a crash course in all the things that make us human.
Both the good and the bad.
Exactly. What's the overall takeaway here, though? What does Seligman say about what we can change and what we're probably better off accepting?
Well, he brings it all together with this concept of depth.
Oh, yeah.
It's like a framework for understanding how changeable different aspects of ourselves really are.
He touched on this idea when we talked about sexuality, right? Like the deeper the layer, the harder it is to shift.
Exactly. And he expands that concept to cover a whole range of things.
Oh.
Personality traits, habits, beliefs, even those deep-seated fears and insecurities.
So how do you figure out how deep something is? Is there like a depth-o-meter we can use?
He lays out some criteria. First, think about origins. How early in life did this thing develop?
Okay.
Second, how resistant is it to change? Has therapy or willpower made any dent in it?
Got it.
Third, is it pretty universal across cultures? Or is it more specific to a certain culture?
Interesting.
And finally, is there a biological basis? Like, are there genes or brain structures involved?
So something like sexual identity, which develops super early, resists change, is pretty consistent across cultures and might have a biological basis, would be considered very deep.
Exactly. So according to Seligman's framework, you're probably not going to change that fundamental part of yourself no matter how hard you try.
Okay, so then something like, let's say, my bad habit of snacking while watching TV that developed later, I could probably change it with some effort. It's not like a universal human thing, and there's no specific gene for potato chip cravings.
You've got it. That means it's more shallow and more likely to budge if you put in the work.
This whole depth concept is kind of mind-blowing. It's like a permission slip to stop beating myself up over the things I can't change and focus my energy on the things that are actually within my control.
That's exactly the point. It's about being realistic and strategic with your self-improvement efforts.
So instead of trying to be someone I'm not, I should work on becoming the best version of myself. Quirks and all.
Seligman is all about working with your natural tendencies, not against them.
Right. It makes sense. We've been talking about all these things. We might want to change depression, anger, unhealthy eating habits. But Seligman also emphasizes the importance of acceptance. What does he mean by that?
He's not saying you should just give up and resign yourself to a life of misery.
Okay.
It's more about acknowledging the things you can't change, like your natural weight or your sexual orientation, and finding ways to live a fulfilling life within those parameters.
It's like making peace with the hand you've been dealt and then figuring out how to play it the best way you can.
Exactly. And he even suggests that this acceptance can be a key ingredient in happiness.
Oh.
When you stop fighting against your nature, you free up so much energy to focus on what you can control. Your attitude, your choices, your actions.
It's like that saying, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot, change the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference.
That pretty much sums it up. And this whole idea of acceptance ties in beautifully with Seligman's work on positive psychology. He's all about focusing on what's right with people, not just what's wrong.
Building on your strengths instead of constantly trying to fix your weaknesses.
Exactly.
So is he saying we should just ignore our flaws, pretend they don't exist?
Not at all. It's about recognizing that we all have limitations, but those limitations don't have to define us.
Right.
It's about finding that balance between self-improvement and self-acceptance.
So it's not about striving for perfection. It's about embracing the messy, imperfect beauty of being human.
Beautifully put.
Yay.
And I think that's a really empowering message.
It is. So, we've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive, but Seligman doesn't leave us hanging. He actually ends the book with some big thought-provoking questions. What are some of the things he wants us to ponder?
He asks things like, if you can't fully control certain aspects of yourself, how do you find meaning and purpose within those limitations? How do you cultivate happiness even when faced with challenges you can't change? What role does acceptance play in living a good life?
Those are some really deep questions. It's like he's challenging us to go beyond those, self-help sound bites and really grapple with what it means to live a fulfilling life.
He doesn't give us easy answers, but he nudges us to keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep searching for our own individual paths.
Our own unique path.
Exactly.
He's basically saying, hey, I've given you some tools and insights. Now go out there and figure out what works for you.
Exactly. It's about taking ownership of your life, embracing your strengths, and finding ways to thrive, even when things are tough.
Well, I don't know about you, but this deep dive has definitely given me a lot to think about. It's like a whole new framework for understanding myself and navigating this crazy thing called life.
Me too. It's a reminder that we're all works in progress, and that's okay. The journey is just as important as the destination.
Well said. And on that note, we're going to wrap up this deep dive into what you can change and what you can't. I hope you found it as insightful and thought-provoking as we have.
And remember, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep embracing the beautiful messiness of being human.
Until next time, happy diving.